In this video, we're going to take a look at a couple aged 57 and 54 with 350,000. They know that they could retire in 3 years living humbly, but they want to know just exactly how much money they could spend without running the risk of running out of money. So we're going to break down their net worth, their goals, their income. So ultimately, we can run projections and determine how much they can spend. And you'll see, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many years out from retirement you are, the same process can be applied to you. Let's get into it. So we'll start with their net worth here in the bank, currently 27.5 thousand, most of in a high yield savings, giving about 4%. And then just two investment accounts. We have Robert's investment account. It's a Roth IRA. He's still contributing to this and would continue for the next couple of years. And then a qualified annuity. This is the surrender value. We actually will remove this before we run the projections and just include the income, because if they did surrender it, they would pay a penalty. The account value is actually more than this, but 121,000, and then that will turn into, as you'll see here in a second, a little over $7,000 a year, guaranteed for the rest of their life. If one of them passes away, the other one would still continue to get 100% of that. It's just not adjusting for inflation as time goes on. So it's going to be that same 7,200 roughly number for the rest of their life. It's not going to increase. And then their home is worth 400,000. They don't quite own all of it just yet. A little bit more to pay off, but then once they do, they will sell it and then plan to rent for about $2,000 a month in today's dollars. They won't sell it until we projected about 2046, just to increase or maximize the probability of success in the projections that we ran. But that $2,000 a month in renting is in today's prices. That will actually adjust for inflation all the way until 2046. The software takes that into account. So now let's look at their retirement goals. Robert wants to retire in 3 years. That's at age 60. His wife hasn't worked since 25, Aurora. We have a placeholder here for the monthly expenses at $2,000. We're, of course, going to increase this and kind of change it around to see how the probability of success is going to react. And ultimately, then we'll be able to know how much they can spend comfortably. It's also on top of that monthly expense. We are accounting for $3,800 a year. This is going to continue to adjust for inflation as well for each of them in health costs. $50,000 a year in long-term care costs at the very end of their life. Just 1 year for each of them is what we're planning for, just because it is unlikely that both of them need it. They're also fine with if one of them needed to move in with children, for example, doing that if they needed to save on costs. So like I said, they're planning to sell the home. That's 2046, then move into renting. Before they sell it, though, they do have to still pay property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. All of that, as you see here, is going to continue to adjust for inflation as well at 3%. Finally, let's look at where their income is coming from before they start taking money from the Roth. Currently, this is technically different, but he is earning $125,000 a year. That, of course, would stop in retirement. They both plan to take Social Security as early as they can at age 62. Couple reasons for that, but it does actually increase their probability of success with the kind of setup they have with not having a ton of money in investment accounts and kind of rather just using that as a supplement and relying a little bit more on Social Security and the annuity. It does make some sense in this case for them to take it earlier at 62. So both of them there, Aurora gets 50% of his benefit just being the spousal since she hasn't worked. And then the annuity there, 7238, would turn on, like I said in the beginning, that would not adjust for inflation. Now let's take a look at the probability of success if they wanted it to be 90%, how much money they could then spend. This is including the home expenses before the sale of the property, also saving for long-term care, and their annual health care costs. So all of those costs we kind of factored in there. This is on top of the $25.30 a month that they could spend if they were, let's say, for example, I'm just going to use a round number here, but if they had a $100,000 a year income and they were going to adjust that by 3% for inflation every single year to 103,000, then it's 3% more of that, 3% more of that. If that's the approach they were to take to determining how much income they would need, then they could spend $25.30. However, a great body of research has shown that although that seems to make a lot of sense on paper or when you kind of reason it out, that doesn't tend to be the actual spending patterns of most retirees. Now we're going to take a little detour here and talk about the retirement spending smile. This is going to allow them to spend much more money earlier on, or maybe even retire much earlier than they thought they would have otherwise, because they realize that even though they might start out spending this much money, whatever reason, because they traveled earlier, maybe it's because their health declines, they're not able to do as much things, maybe it's because there's more fear of spending money the later that retirees tend to get into retirement, they tend to spend less money. And I want to pause real quick. If you are enjoying the video, if you're finding this helpful, please do leave a like. It helps me out greatly. Let's get back into it. So with this spending smile, essentially what it says is if you accounted for inflation. So another way to do that is to assume that there is no inflation. So if someone had that $100,000 a year spend, they could just say, all right, well, there's no inflation. I'm going to keep the same standard of living for the next 30 years of retirement. This blue line here shows that that's how much income we got to plan for, just $100,000 a year, because that's their current cost of living. The retirement spending smile says that's actually not how it tends to go. Usually your spending tends to go down and down and down, and then it looks like a smile. So about age 83, 84, whether it's due to increased health costs or whatever it might be, the smile starts to come back up. You start to get much closer to that original cost of living you had. So when you take this into account, you might be able to retire much earlier or spend much more money than you thought otherwise. You can see here as well, even though this looks like a massive smile, this is not going down to zero. On the left here, the bottom of the dip is about $74,000. So about a 26% decrease in spending at the bottom. So it's not like you're spending $100,000 at the start and then it's on average people are spending $50,000. No, it's slowly decreasing over time, which again, you can account for when you are planning these things out and have it make a big difference. So if we go back, we'll see that when we account for the spending smile to have the same probability of success of 90% over here, it's about $29.05 a month. And I want to put a little caveat in this probability of success. This is what the software says. They are looking at the history of the stock market, at all of the past data that we kind of have, and saying based on all of that, here's the probability of success that they have with the portfolio and net worth and the strategy that they've put forward. However, just because something hasn't happened in the past does not mean that it won't happen in the future. For example, if hyperinflation happens, the government just starts spending money or giving out credits faster than they ever have, and the US dollar becomes worthless, well, then this probability of success didn't seem so reliable after all. Just want to throw out there, it is arbitrary. It's not this dogmatic, infallible resource that we can look to. However, it is helpful. Now, if they wanted 75% probability of success in spending, so again, getting a little riskier here, but they're able to spend a little bit more money. If they just did that inflation-adjusted income, they're looking at about $27.55. If they include the retirement spending smile, about $31.05 per month in the beginning. And you can see here, I want to point out, if you look at my little laser, this year here on both of them, that's when they sell the home and then switch to renting. That's why the cost goes up there, and then these big years are the 1 year of long-term care needed for both of them. Let's just look at a quick summary here. So this is assuming that flat increase annually. Again, this is really a big deal when it comes to being able to retire earlier or being able to spend more money, but you can see the expenses based on, we already went over 90 and 75, but also 50 and 32% probability of successes. So these are the expenses just assuming that flat increase. Now look at the difference if we assumed the spending smile. So I'll go back and forth here. It's $29.05 as we showed there for the 90% before, $25.30 if we didn't account for it. Now it's $31.05 accounting for a 75% success in the beginning if we adjust for the smile, and it's about the same to just have a 32% probability of success without taking into account the smile, and it of course continues to get bigger, although you probably don't want as low as a 32% probability of success unless you are willing to make some big life changes. For example, moving in with a child, as I mentioned there before. Maybe your employer is helping out with healthcare expenses. If that's the case and you're really, really willing to drastically decrease your lifestyle, that's the only reason that you might consider actually looking at a probability of success that low. However, I just included it in there for reference. Hopefully, this video was helpful. Again, if you did find it helpful, please do subscribe, like the video. It helps me out. I release videos twice a week going into all things retirement, breaking down situations for people. I try to do that in great detail. So again, subscribe, and I will see you in a future video. Bye-bye.